Hello, everybody. I'm author Matt De Reno, author of the Midas Files. So welcome to my very first ever live reading. I figured this is a good way to kind of explore a couple different things. I've long wanted to do an audio book version for Amazon Audible, and I'm currently looking into that. And I just kind of wanted to get the feel for what it'd be like to actually read some of this material and kind of go from there. And it dawned on me it might make for a nice weekly broadcast to kind of read a chapter and talk about what inspired me to write it and that sort of thing. So that's why I'm doing this. And with that, I'd like to talk about a little brief intro to the Midas Files series for those of you who have not read it yet. And since I'm not on the bestsellers list, that would probably be a lot of people out there. So, the Midas Files series is a techno-thriller series. It starts off rooted in Pittsburgh in the late 1990s, and it follows the times of a young man named Hank Raglan who's working his way up through an organization and becomes involved in a lot of corporate subterfuge and mysterious technology, and starts to begin that, not everything meets the eye. He's joined with Caroline Friday as another main protagonist in the story, and she's like his best friend's younger sister, and she's kind of a wild one, and she's like not sure what she wants to do in her life. She's in her, like a lot of us in our 20s, I guess. So she basically is working a crappy job and decides she wants to get investigative journalism. And as the story unfolds, she discovers that Hank Raglan could be in some serious danger. Even though he's progressing in the ranks at the company, she's beginning to discover that he's starting to deal with some very shady people, and it involves some mysterious circumstances surrounding the local death of a couple prominent researchers and scientists. So that's kind of the series, how it gets started. The Midas Protocol, Midas Files Book 1, I published about 5 years ago, and it took me a while, but I finally finished Midas Files Book 2, which is Call of the Minotaur, and it takes place about 10 years later, and it kind of takes it to a whole new level. But this is where the series starts, and I kind of want to introduce people to it here. So with that, I'm going to start reading it. And if you have any questions and you want to ask away. I've never done this before, so bear with me. I'm sure these will get a lot better as time goes on. And but really, with that being said, I'm going to start with Chapter 1, The Gold Box. Okay, well, I'm on Chapter 2, so that's okay. Okay, so Chapter 1, The Gold Box. Saturday, October 15th, 1983, Swickley, PA. Would they kill me for this? Larry Bingham shifted into neutral and coasted his twice-driven 83 Mercedes 380 SL sedan across his cobblestone drive. The car came to a gentle stop in the back of his sprawling arts and craft mansion, but his mind did not. He longed to enjoy the gorgeous fall night, but several questions weighed heavily on his mind. On a lesser note, the corporate maven hated how the car drove. Why did I even buy it? He told Ava it was because his Volvo had seen its best days, and that was no lie. The car ran great, though, when he walked away from it at the dealership earlier today. He had to confess buying a new car was symbolic of dealing with a far more profound change, one of an extraordinary nature. He studied the gold box in partial disbelief. He completed his life's signature work. There it lay next to him on the passenger seat of a car he was not quite ready to adopt. Larry let the engine run until Willie Nelson's Always on My Mind had concluded its last verse. The song was fitting this evening. For the last 15 years, only his research had been on his mind. Everything he had worked for sat next to him now, and the power of what he created frightened him. Larry caught his eyes in the rearview mirror. He had changed a good bit in the 15 years it took to build the gold box. His face was still narrow and slender, but his hair had turned gray. His receding hairline had traveled considerably to the top of his head. Kind of like mine, I think. The wide-eyed wonder of the 50-year-old Lawrence Bingham was gone. In its place were the tired eyes of a 65-year-old man that had put his work before all else in life. Long hours of research created the man that looked back at him. It is time to undo what time had done to me. Larry opened the door and stepped out into a pleasant, cool fall night. The long day had tired him, but the evening air felt refreshing. As he rolled his tight shoulders and lowered his arms, he detected a rustling in the woods from the direction of Ava's enormous Japanese garden. He walked toward the trees, squinted through the darkness, and focused on an edge of overgrown rhododendrons that led to the garden. Despite the moonlit evening, a blanket of towering pines cast the bordering shrubs in deep shadow. Larry studied the thicket but could not make out anything unusual. A still silence returned to his estate and nothing more. It was clear that stress and sleep deprivation were getting the best of him. He chuckled and inhaled a deep breath of the fall air. All was well and good. The long hours would soon end and he could relax in the comfort of his home. His fears were simply unfounded and illogical. Why would they kill me when only I know how to build the gold box? Why would they not provide a safeguard for the gold box as promised? These are smart men. He chuckled. He could almost hear Ava saying it now. Larry, you're always thinking of the worst case scenario. Relax. Enjoy your success. He returned to the sedan and opened the passenger door. He retrieved his priceless invention with the caressing hand of a father who had momentarily lost the whereabouts of his young child. Boy, that would be awful. Leaning back against his car, he smiled with pride and admired the gold box again. Larry held it high in his outstretched palm, as if it were an offering to the celestial heavens. He turned the device in a loving manner, taking in its properties and shape as if for the first time. Though he had engineered and refined its dimensions over many years, tonight was an important night for it. As Larry slept that evening, the Watcher would conduct a final trial on what he invented. The production trial, which was the final hurdle in validating his life's work, would take place in his dreams, and other dimensions, if dreams could be thought of as such. If it passed that trial, great change awaited humanity. If it did not, the effort to build the gold box would continue in earnest, much like it had for thousands of years. Failure was unlikely, as Larry had successfully prepared the steps to create the gold box numerous times. What made him uneasy was that the implications of success were far more unnerving. The gold box could bestow a new era upon humanity, or it could be a terrible mechanism for its complete undoing. Moreover, he took it home from the lab tonight. And though he had good reasons for doing so, that act would not be viewed well. What choice did he have? The Majestic 12 promised to ensure the safekeeping and wise stewardship of the gold box, but they made no progress in doing so. That commitment was part of the deal from the beginning. Without that promise, Larry would have never agreed to develop the gold box in the first place. The gold box shouldn't be here. It shouldn't be at the lab, but Larry decided to keep it until he knew how it would be safeguarded, a decision that would infuriate the Majestic 12. Would it anger them enough that they might kill him? He couldn't shake the thought that it might. He turned the gold box in his outstretched palm again, and I just kind of have to do that when I read that part. I'm sorry, And by the way, this is one I built. No, I didn't build it. I bought it at Home Goods. But anyway, kind of funny. It kind of looks like my gold box. So a little aside there. After he turned the gold box in his outstretched palm again, he studied it. In the starlight, amid the rhythmic din of crickets and night creatures, the box hummed, sang, and generated a powerful aura of energy. The gold box was evolving. He was convinced its cognitive and machine learning capabilities were growing. No bigger than a Rubik's Cube, although mine's a little bigger, the gold box featured a smooth and brilliant golden surface on all sides. Cool to the touch, though it looked as if it should be warm to hold. Upon closer inspection, the surface displayed subtle plasma-like fluctuations that radiated mysterious gold, orange, and red lights. At times, Larry could see into the box. When that occurred, plasma-like vectors revealed an inner cube, the cube within the cube, as Larry called it. At other times, it could change to become a mirror-like reflection of everything around it, rendering the gold box almost invisible to the naked eye. At its most unassuming, restful state, it was gray. The gold box was a hypercube, sometimes called a tesseract. However, its inner dimensions were only glimpsed when the intermittent opacity passed across its gilded surface, a curious, unpredictable attribute of the gold box which Larry had not anticipated. He returned to thinking about it and turned glum. Okay, I tripped over that one. Okay, there's going to be a few of those. He turned glum. Larry abhorred the idea of what the gold box might do if it was used for nefarious ambitions, and as of late, his trust had eroded in his enigmatic sponsors. Initially, Larry had been assuaged with the Majestic 12's verbal promise to safeguard the gold box if it could be built. After all, their resources were critical. Nevertheless, now that the gold box had become a reality, he required assurances that the group would follow through on its commitment to convene an international meeting of the world's top leaders and decide how to properly steward and safeguard the gold box technology. If they were not willing to do that, then the gold box rightfully belonged to Larry. Of course, they kept telling him the meeting would happen, that it was merely on account of logistics, that it was delayed. These were important people. They would all need to have the time available, Larry was told. As of late, Larry sensed that the meeting would never happen. More worrisome, he felt the committee was stonewalling him. Each time he broached the subject about its safekeeping, the subject was changed. When he sought a status update, the update was that the status was forthcoming. The proverbial can had been kicked down the road far too long. How much longer could they delay, Larry wondered, if an ulterior motive existed? Perhaps MJ-12 wanted to keep the gold box. He palmed the case and walked to the back of his car, looking up at the glittery night sky, truly stunning. It was as if God had kicked a pail of diamonds across a sash of black velvet. An ample smile formed on his narrow, angular jaw. He relished the moment and enjoyed a deep satisfaction. Larry took a refreshing breath and exhaled. On that note, I'm going to take a refreshing drink of Miller Lite. Something to wet the whistle a little there. Okay. He palmed the case and walked back to his car. His thoughts turned to Ava, his loving companion of over 30 years. He felt a surge of warmth and comfort knowing that she was waiting inside for him. She knew he had been working on something special and secretive for over a decade and a half, and that it had taken precious time away from them. Nonetheless, she supported him every step of the way. She often referred to his gold box as his mistress, and in many ways, she was right. How many evenings had he shared out the tantalizing joys of the gold box like a secret lover? Tonight, it was time to return to Ava and say goodbye to his mistress, if only for an evening. Before he did, however, there was one last order of business, which Ava would certainly frown upon. Well-deserved and long overdue, Larry Bingham would treat himself to marijuana. A year ago, he promised himself this last rebellion if he finished the gold box and his beta trial proved successful. It did, and Larry was a man that kept promises even to his lesser sensibilities. Larry set the gold box on top of his car and opened the trunk while sucking in the cool night air. He relished the sound of crickets and the pine smell of a tranquil evening. A melange of old leather and new car smell punctuated the evening air. A weather-beaten, leathery golf bag that had been transferred from his beloved Volvo earlier constituted the sole item in the trunk. With the zeal of an adolescent, he rummaged for the hoochie stashed in the golf bag earlier. He had been carefully hidden in a zippered side pocket, which contained a crease scorecard, 3 or 4 scuffed golf balls, loose change, and a pair of black lace panties that reminded Larry that the gold box had not been his only mistress over the years. He removed a clear plastic bag that contained several hand-rolled joints packed with a special rare hooch, a blend that Larry came to call the Red Rose. Rusty told him it was a Himalayan hybrid of Brazilian cannabis strains intended for true connoisseurs. Larry demanded nothing but the best, and over the years he had come to trust Rusty on all matters relating to cannabis. Rusty had advised him that this variety was great for those suffering from depression or stress because it had a very happy and uplifting effect. Unfortunately, it caused some to feel paranoid. Tonight, Larry wondered if it was not for him. He was not typically paranoid, but he had heard strange sounds in the woods this evening. What other things would he hear, imagined or real, once he burned the Red Rose? Despite his misgivings, Larry removed a joint and struck a match. Without further hesitation, he brought the weed to an aromatic burning incense and puffed. Against the fender of his unloved luxury car, he leaned back. A burst of the satisfying cannabis wafted to his flaring nostrils. The aroma of the pot was sweet and fruity and rendered him in a state of serenity, just as Rusty told him it would. He giggled. Larry sucked in the smoke, exhaled, breathed. His whole body relaxed. Tranquility, peace with a far too tumultuous world. Connection. Now that he had resumed smoking the kind bud, for the life of him he could not remember why he swore to give it up. He choked on a deep breath of the weed and exhaled. The smoke escaped through his nose and mouth as his eyes closed. Gone now were the onerous implications of the gold box. The image of Rusty Gibb laughing with him at Jumbo's boiler room earlier today appeared in his mind. Rusty was always reliable when it came to quality control. Feeling uplifted and his spirits replenished, he picked up the gold box from the top of his car. He held it high up into the night sky. It shined, changing colors like a talisman of alien origin, and it pulsated in various degrees of luminescence. It was fascinating to behold, even more now that he was high. He could look at the gold box all night and still find something about it that intrigued him. A short while later, he looked down at the glowing tip of his dwindling joint. A bent, rolled paper now reduced to an ember between his pinched fingers. A gentle breeze blew and raised. There was a certain energy in the air. A sense of vulnerability coursed through his body. Was it merely his nerves? Was it the weed? Was it an effect of the gold box? He chuckled. It was time to go inside. He had been out here too long. The gold box had returned to a restful state of gray, and Larry desired to do the same. In the trunk of his unloved car, he stashed the gold box deep in the side compartment of his golf bag, along with his bag of marijuana, and as he closed his trunk, he laughed. There it was, the gold box, hidden in his cruddy golf bag next to his dope stash and a pair of panties. However, in that instant, an idea to protect the gold box occurred to him. He would tell Laporte, his lifelong friend and colleague, a veritable brother, about the gold box first thing in the morning. This was a bold move, for he swore an oath of secrecy to MJ-12, but Larry didn't see any other option. If there was no safeguard in place, Larry needed another trusted person to know what he had created. Of course, he wouldn't show Tony the actual gold box. That would be too much for any man to digest at once. Rather, he would show him his research and let Tony arrive at what he had created on his own. Still, as close as he and Tony were, telling him about the gold box would be a dicey proposition. Over the years, he kept Tony strategically misinformed about his research. The gold box was a vast departure from Larry's work in advanced aerospace and metals applications, to say nothing of the fact that he had maintained a silent partner, a mentor to be more accurate, an entity that could communicate with Larry in his dreams. What would Tony make of that? Moreover, Larry was a member of the Majestic 12, a secretive organization comprised of influential scientists, prominent military leaders, and high-ranking U.S. politicians, which, of course, did not officially exist. All of this would wound his dear friend, to say nothing about the appropriated, perhaps even misappropriated, resources that were used to produce the gold box. It would be obvious that he had shelved other research, including his pioneering work on evium, an advanced alloy now years behind schedule. Still, in the end, Tony would see the big picture. Tony would know what to do. The lights in the upstairs master suite went dark. Ava had tired of waiting for him. Larry exhaled. Now that he had resolved to tell Tony about the gold box, he was at peace. It was time to share an evening with Ava and let her know he would never be leaving her side again. On the way to the back patio, Larry flicked the last and final glowing ember of his diminished bud into one of Ava's many flower beds. He was amazed at how strong an aroma that weed had created. It seemed that the entire back of the house smelled of bud. He took one last deep breath. Then he unlocked the back French doors and stepped inside his house. His dog, Fermi, raced from the entrance hall. Larry leaned over and scratched the boisterous Pomeranian behind the ears. As he often did, Larry neglected to lock the back French doors. He left his car and lab keys on the marble kitchen counter and the gold box in a car he never liked and one that he would never drive again. Okay, that concludes scene 1. Now, this is a particularly long chapter. In the Midas Files book, the Midas Protocol, I was just looking at this. It's a 6,000 word chapter, so it's a long one. Most of the chapters are between 2,000 and 3,000 words, which is kind of my comfort zone. But it also is it sets up the whole series, what happens next. It is my first book. There's a lot of debate about prologues in general. Are they good? Do people like them? Can't we just cut to the story? But for thriller material, prologues are kind of expected in some sort, like some kind of incident that sets up the story and before all the main characters are introduced. And that's kind of what we're going through there. So we have Larry Bingham, and it's interesting because so much of the whole series centers around Dr. Lawrence Bingham and his gold box. And yet, this is really the only scene or the first chapter is the only chapter where we get to really meet him. And as you can probably get that, it's probably not going to go well in the next scene. So I'm going to get into the next scene. We get to meet some other pretty interesting characters, one of which is a mainstay throughout the entire series. The next scene is kind of fun. It's a little dark. I hear quite a bit about my opening grabber in this scene. So maybe somehow I have to address this in some later books, but it's really the scene that sets up everything. So I hope you enjoy. I'll give you a second to have a sip of your favorite wine, maybe old-fashioned. I didn't have time to kind of prepare anything, but grab a Miller Lite because I was already behind schedule, and what the heck. So so if you're watching this, whether you don't get to see this live but you've watched it recorded, I sincerely appreciate that, and I hope you enjoy what I'm doing here. I plan to continue doing these readings going forward until we have a complete sort of episodic podcast of all the chapters available. So that's one way I'd like to get the word out. Now, I need to have a beer. Sip real quick. Tastes great. Okay. So, let's get to section 2. 2 men crept to the back door of Well House. The shorter of the pair set a can of gasoline on the stone patio that led up to the mahogany-trimmed French doors, the same ones Larry Bingham had entered a short time earlier. The moon cast the back of the house in a soft, luminous glow. A gentle breeze blew along the hilltop. A star-filled sky gave little portent to the evil deeds the two men behind the house planned to carry out under a moonlit October night. Johnny's taller, exceedingly more fit partner turned the polished brass door handle with a knowing, careful hand. The other hand braced the stainless steel fireman's axe, stripped of its rubber handle molding. The bare metal shaft of the axe rested behind his neck and lay across his broad shoulders. The device glinted in the moonlight like a sword across the back of a grim knight. The two men presented a contrast in both height and appearance. The shorter man was fat and dressed in a baggy white jogging suit. He wore white tennis shoes with black accents and sloppily laced shoes, a gold medallion necklace, an Italian horn pendant draped around his portly neck, and a tuft of black bushy chest hair sprouted from a ribbed undershirt. I don't know, it kind of describes a lot of people I hang out with at the Highland. Maybe not, I don't know. Anyway, the taller man was slim, fit, and covered head to toe in jet black clothing. He wore a body contouring black thermal shirt, dark cargo pants, and a highly polished pair of black ankle boots, laces snug and tight, tucked in, belt-buckled, a coal-colored metal diver watch. All this man's accessories appear finely tuned and polished. No matter their differences in style, both men shared a common goal this evening, a killing. As expected, the men heard a dog rousing from a slumber. Once the door was ajar, the little dog sprouted out into the back patio. It growled at them. Even though they expected the dog, it still surprised Johnny Rocco to see it. Hell, it was a funny little dog. Johnny loved dogs. He hated people, in particular black people, and to a lesser extent cats, but he loved dogs. The plan was to let the little dog run into the backyard. At least that is what they planned after canvassing the rich man's house. Nevertheless, the dog stayed and wagged its tail at them. It wouldn't leave. It gave Johnny its paw. Cute little guy. Johnny's partner smirked as if he found something humorous in the little creature. It was rare to see his partner smile. "Go ahead, little doggy," Johnny whispered to it, scratching it behind the ear. "Get out of here. Go on, get." Johnny tried to shoo it away, even nudged the dog on its backside with his shoe, but it would not leave. The Pomeranian wanted to play. Vanterpool lowered the axe head to the ground. He bent his knees slightly, leaned over the shaft, and waggled the head of his axe like a golf club. Johnny guessed the man knew enough to loosen up for the Binghams. No doubt axe murdering a family was strenuous work, and Johnny often argued a young man's game. Years ago, Johnny would often chop wood for days prior to an axe murder to whip himself in the proper shape. Even with that preparation, he had thrown his back out twice. Ever since, he stuck to more practical forms of execution, like arson. While Johnny shook the dog's paw and made a funny face at it, he didn't notice that Vanterpool had brought the axe head slowly from the ground until it hovered up high in the air, gleaming in the moonlight like a guillotine blade. Swoosh! The axe head blurred as it fanned the patio in a fast, sweeping, and deadly arc. The dog exploded. A divot of dog entrails flew up and splattered Johnny's face. A portion of the dog's body ricocheted off his right eye socket and sent the remnant spinning into a bed of hollyhocks. A shower of seed pods billowed up and littered the patio stones. Johnny was surprised that he didn't lose a hand in the process. The blade had been millimeters from cleaving his hand along with the dog's head. "For!" Vanterpool said. "What the fuck?" Johnny snarled, trying his best not to scream at his partner. He stood and glowered at Vanterpool and then indignantly scraped in white blood and canine innards from his face. Dog hair and guts covered his white tracksuit. Vanterpool smiled, then rolled his shoulders. "Well, that's certainly thrown a spanner in the works." I'm sorry, I'm not good at doing British accents, so I need someone that can do that for the audiobook. Johnny paused, then glowered at Vanterpool. Although still angry, the hand strength, speed, and dexterity with which the freakish Mortimer Vanterpool had cleaved the dog into two bloody pieces amazed Johnny Rocco. The remains of the dog seeped into the patio stones as Johnny's thoughts turned to the specs of the job. This hit required the use of a fireman's axe and a can of gasoline. Johnny was picked for the flame-on duty, no doubt, because he had been a volunteer fireman early in life. Of course, he had been the enterprising kind that burned down houses to stay busy. No matter. He caught the eye of Philadelphia mob boss Fats Castillo, who had a need for a skilled arsonist. He only wondered then what background his strange partner, with the annoying English accent, claimed when it came to the axe work. The gas cannon axe had something to do with how their true employers, the ones that contracted Fats Castillo, wanted the crime scene to appear. Nevertheless, for whatever ambitious scheme that Fats had agreed to, the crew to the what just happened appeared to fly in the face of making it look as if the Binghams owed money to the wrong people. Folks that killed to settle debts usually did so neatly. A bloodbath marked a psycho, not a professional devoted to his craft. Poor dog didn't deserve to die like that. The job would not be neat, but that was okay. He was under no illusions about the grisly scene that would unfold. Jobs were never clean when they called for an axe. Towards those ends, he wore an old jogging suit for that very purpose. Now awash in dog entrails, he was glad he chose the garment. He planned to burn it afterward anyway. Still, what Vanterpool did showed a lot of disrespect. What in the fuck, man? Johnny grimaced, clenched his teeth, his face reddened. Vanterpool glowered and thrust his chest out, invading his space, towering over Johnny like a bully. We're still quids in, are we not, mates? Vanterpool said with a thin smile. Johnny's left hand clenched into a tight fist, while his lazy right snaked his way to the handle of a .38 snub-nosed pistol. The gun was wedged between his tight waistband and his 38-year-old snub-nosed pecker. Okay, I forgot I wrote that. Okay. The return of Vanterpool's cocky smile only reddened Johnny's face more. Vanterpool's pale blue eyes flashed with excitement as he watched Johnny reach for the handle of his revolver. His grin begged Johnny to pull the weapon, but Johnny prided himself on his professionalism, and he could follow orders. They had a job to do. That came first. Johnny released his grip on the gun handle. He breathed easier. He wouldn't let this man get over on him now. He had an obligation to Fats. Plus, he had other business in this area. Swickley offered a wide-open market for Johnny's side business as a drug dealer. He planned to stay after this job was done and set up shop. No matter, after he finished this job, Johnny would deal with Vanterpool. Vanterpool would be sorry he crossed Johnny Rocco. Okay, I'm going to pause there for a quick Miller Lite sip. Kind of wet the whistle a little bit. I do have a guest, my first guest. It's a cat. It's my cat, Scout. Scout, hey buddy, you want to come over here? I think you're the only one listening right now. But that's fine. Anyway, don't knock that water over, okay? No. Okay, I gotta, hey, get over here. Oh, okay. Okay, you get to meet my cat real quick, okay. Say hi, Scouty. Whoa, okay. Okay, Scouty, don't knock anything over. Okay. One more quick little sip, and then we'll get into I think it's the last section of this chapter. And then we are through the opening, chapter 1, the gold box. Okay. The adroit Vanterpool entered the Bingham mansion first, while Johnny Rocco lagged. Vanterpool's footfalls made no sounds as he strolled across the gray ceramic kitchen floor with his axe slung over his shoulder. In stark contrast, Johnny banged the door jamb with his gas can. Clang! Vanterpool turned towards Johnny and shot him a look of incredulity, then shook his head in disapproval. Johnny smirked and followed that with a stupid expression. Bingham's kitchen was cavernous and at least 10 times bigger than the galley kitchen Johnny and his wife made work back in their dilapidated South Philly row house. It was dark and almost all the lights were off except for a row of dimmed recess lights. With luck, the bright moon aided the lighting in the house. While Johnny gazed around the kitchen, Vanterpool stood underneath the timbered archway that led to the main hall, frowning at him and shaking his head. Johnny ignored him this time and continued to study the kitchen with feigned curiosity because he knew it irritated Vanterpool. When his eyes returned to where Vanterpool had stood, the man was gone. Vanterpool, apparently tired of waiting for him, had disappeared down the hallway. Let's get this over with. Johnny bumbled across the kitchen and found himself in the timbered archway where Vanterpool had stood moments ago. Vanterpool was not in the long hallway. Johnny figured he was already creeping up the steps to the unsuspecting sleeping Binghams. Johnny set his can of gasoline down in the hallway next to a pair of gossamer slippers. He studied family pictures in gilded frames. One of the pictures featured an older gentleman, very similar to the owner of the home they now intruded upon. Anyway, just a little side note here. I have a blog article. If you go to the Scratch Writing website and check out the Bingham's Notebook blog, there's a recent article that kind of captures a lot of what the photo means, what's in the photo. So I'm reading this story. I'm also in parallel once a week attempting to provide a reader's guide to the series as well. And that kind of syncs up with what I'm reading. So there's, so if I'm reading a chapter here, there's going to be sort of a more in-detailed reader's guide update on the Bingham's Notebook blog. Now, back to our story. The man in the photo was lean, tall, and thin on top, with a trimmed mustache and rangy shoulders, and resembled a close relative of this Larry fella. He stood next to a smart-looking middle-aged man with short but thick black hair, tightly cropped but with a wayward tuft. His slender face featured a neatly trimmed mustache and soul-patch goatee. In Johnny's opinion, the guy looked kind of Italian. The men in the photo stood behind a table which displayed a strange-looking model of a cube made out of some kind of odd metal connectors. The cube seemed to have a smaller one inside of it, and it was connected to the bigger one at the corners. The caption on the photo read, "The Tesseract." B. Oberon and Professor W. Morgan Bingham, Oberlin, Ohio, 1886. His concentration on the photo was interrupted when he noticed the cold stare of his partner reflected in the glass of the photo. Vanterpool had appeared next to him without making a sound. How did he do that? Vanterpool braced his sharp firefighter's axe in front of himself now, holding it with two hands, and glowered at Johnny. However, the picture that Johnny had been looking at fascinated his partner. Vanterpool moved him aside again with a dismissive shove and squinted at the picture. Johnny was growing tired of this prick. Vanterpool removed the frame from the wall and studied it closely, holding it up to his face with his right hand while holding the axe gingerly in his left. The man was lost in thought. "Oberon," Vanterpool laughed. "I thought I killed you at the Dead Sea, sneaky little bastard. How did you do it?" Vanterpool grinned and dropped the picture to the hallway floor. It shattered, but made no sound when it did. Johnny was flabbergasted. How did it not make a sound? "Let's go," Vanterpool commanded. In a steady tandem, they proceeded along the main hallway into the immense foyer of Wellington, or whatever the hell this Bingham fellow called his house. At the end of the hall, they arrived at a gorgeous circular 3-story foyer. Johnny beheld an elaborate, rose-shaped, red metal chandelier modeled as a giant rose bouquet, suspended upside down from a rotunda, featuring stained glass of an Egyptian motif. The crossbars supporting the chandelier formed a golden cross. It was truly a magnificent chandelier. An intricate wooden spiral staircase curved along the wall and ascended to the upper levels of the house, with landings on the second and third floor. A small brass table lamp was set on a small pedestal table next to the large front double oak entry doors, which featured intricate stained glass inlays of bizarre Egyptian patterns. Even Vanterpool, Johnny observed, took a moment to admire the rose chandelier. Nevertheless, Vanterpool was ready for work. He spit-polished his axe while lost in thought. Is he thinking of that picture? He seemed to recognize the man in the frame. Who was he? With the axe over his shoulder, Vanterpool ascended the steps casually, paying little attention to where he placed each foot on the Persian rug runner that led up to the Bingham's bedroom level. No doubt the man knew what he was doing. According to plan, Johnny waited at the bottom of the steps in the foyer by his can of gasoline and felt as useful as the table lamp in the corner. He did his best to keep a steady hand and a calm mind. He waited and clutched his can of gas. Silence. Seconds turned to minutes. Minutes turned to centuries. What took so long? Johnny became preoccupied with the magnificent rose chandelier. It had to be worth a fortune. He was well familiar with this level of wealth. Fats had something of its kind in his Philly mansion. The chandelier. It shook, vibrating for a moment, then shuddered again and swayed. A resonating thunk followed. Something heavy on the floor fell upstairs. The house shook. Johnny jerked and jumped back. A heavy whipping sound followed, the crack of porcelain against a wall. Another thunk, accompanied with a rolling sound, as if a ball or some round heavy object rolled across the floorboards. A loud crash of immense proportions followed, and Johnny wondered if the entire upper level of the house was going to come crashing down upon him. It was like someone heaved the bedroom dresser across the room and into a wall upstairs. How could that be? How could one man do that? What strength would a man have to have? A short while later, silence returned to Well House, and his partner descended the steps with that same casual nonchalance with which he ascended earlier. Only this time, Vanderpool carried Larry and Ava Bingham's severed heads tucked under his left arm. Okay, I'm trying not to chuckle at that, but, kind of grisly. Okay. Vanderpool walked with a strange calmness. Blood and brain covered his partner's axe head, much like the dog's entrails had covered Johnny earlier. To Johnny's astonishment, there was blood around Vanderpool's mouth and chin. Did he eat them? At the bottom of the steps, Vanderpool paused. What are you doing with their heads? Johnny demanded. Adrenaline coursed through his body. His heart raced. His partner's mouth curved into a thin smile as he raised their heads higher for Johnny to better see Larry and Ava Bingham's mashed heads. The cuts at the neckline were perfectly made. Their eyes pointed in impossible directions. Larry's face seemed particularly drained and sunken, as if it wasn't Larry's face at all. It was apparent that Vanderpool had done something very weird to Lawrence Bingham's head. Quid's in at last, Vanderpool said. All of his thoughts shall belong to me. I will soon know where his cube of Aurelia is located. He spoke almost as if in admiring fashion about Lawrence Bingham. Are you ready to tell me your secrets, Dr. Bingham? Vanderpool, little page jump there. Vanderpool dropped Ava's head and let it roll across the floor. The partially eaten, misshapen head rolled toward Johnny. It stopped at Johnny's tennis shoes. Johnny jumped back with his mouth wide open. Ava's head fixed on him, frozen with malevolence that seemed to blame him for her and her husband's death. Johnny had killed people before, and it stopped bothering him long ago. But this was different. Eating the Binghams was an affront to his profession. Not to mention his sanity. Johnny had enough of this psycho. It was time to end this fool. Fats would have to understand that his partner went nuts. Johnny retrieved his gun from his pants. Vanderpool did nothing, while Johnny took aim at Vanderpool's head and pulled the hammer back with his thumb. Dinner's over, mother... Zap! Before Johnny could fire, Vanderpool cut the air with his hand, sending a surging, twisting plane of blue energy from his open palm. The energy blast twisted and struck Johnny before he could pull the trigger of his gun. Johnny only saw a blinding bright blue flash when his body became numb and still. He sensed he had been burned in some unimaginable, horrific way. He screamed but made no sound. The energy blast had removed his shoulder and part of his body before fanning out and destroying the foyer and slamming into a row of trees outside. A terrifying realization took hold of him. I should be dead. At his feet lay Johnny's severed arm, still clutching his gun. A quarter of his body had been sheared away, incinerated in the blast, exposing his beating heart to the air. Yet he was still alive. How is this possible? Johnny couldn't move his body, but he could turn his head. The blast had ripped a cavernous hole through the front of the house before slamming into the trees outside. The house shuddered and became unstable. The gold crossbars that held the beautiful rose chandelier gave way, and the stained glass that created the beautiful rotunda around it rained down. Johnny wanted nothing more than to have a quick death at this point. However, his ordeal was far from over. The air hummed. A pulsing sound grew louder, and the moon went dark. Johnny looked up through the gaping hole in the roof where the rose chandelier had been, and now saw a massive black triangular craft hovering over the wrecked mansion. The corners of the black triangle featured balls of glowing orange plasma. As the craft hovered, the entire house shook and shuddered. Pictures and decorations fell from the walls. All throughout Well House, cabinets went flying open. Then the humming stopped, and the house returned to normal. An aperture opened in the middle of the black triangular craft, bathing the entire foyer in a cone of blue light. This light, or perhaps the craft itself, created a curious anti-gravity effect. Johnny's severed gun-wielding arm, his gas can, and Ava Bingham's head lifted from the floor and floated about him like they were fish flakes in pond water. Yet Johnny was still held in place, still kept alive. Meanwhile, Vanderpool pulled apart the skull of Lawrence Bingham and removed his brain. "Where did you hide the cube?" Johnny Rocco's eyes bulged. He dreaded the thought that Vanderpool would soon be pulling his head apart next. Vanderpool let go of the brainless, sunken head of Lawrence Bingham, which gently floated in the air too. At this point, Vanderpool closed his eyes and started to eat Lawrence Bingham's brain. He seemed to be enjoying a moment of serenity and peace. A certain rejuvenation had taken hold of him as he feasted upon the gray, wet organ in his hand. Fear of a level he had never imagined before coursed through his body. Johnny wanted to scream but could not because of this creature's evil powers. He could only stand to witness the depravity that Vanderpool had unleashed upon the Binghams, their house, and what would he unleash next? As he watched Vanderpool consume Bingham's brain, Johnny became sad that he would never be able to enjoy his wife's awful cooking again. He would never set another fire. He would never kill a bad person again for the benefit of the world. Good people or bad people made a difference to Johnny Rocco, but to his sick partner they all appeared to taste the same. Vanderpool opened his eyes and smiled. Vanderpool clearly had come to a realization, as if he had discovered the thought from Bingham's mind because he ate it. "Ah, it is in your car. How brilliantly stupid." Vanderpool walked past Johnny Rocco and gently tapped the floating brainless heads of Lawrence and Ava Bingham. They began to tumble and float in the air like grotesque balloons. Johnny watched as Vanderpool took obvious delight in tapping them higher. Then when the heads began their descent, tapping them up again and spinning them. Johnny's severed arm, still clutching his gun, floated and spun in a similar manner. Vanderpool twirled it in the air and laughed as Johnny's limb revolved like a slow-moving propeller. After amusing himself for a few moments, Vanderpool returned to a more meditative state. He closed his eyes and spread out his arms with his palms out. His entire body raised off the floor. He then turned toward the outside of the house and pointed in that direction. A short time later, Lawrence Bingham's car floated into the foyer, suspended several feet off the ground as if it were light as a feather. Vanderpool pointed at the hovering car. He made a swirling gesture with his index finger. The car revolved, and then its trunk opened. A golf bag, a bag of marijuana, and a beautiful golden cube floated out of the trunk. Vanderpool's eyes remained closed, but they radiated a golden color. He opened his hand, and the gold cube darted straight into his palm. When the cube hit his hand, a powerful wave of energy rippled out from Vanderpool, shaking the house. Vanderpool opened his eyes, and they were filled with a golden light. He seemed bigger, too, more muscular if that was possible. His skull had elongated, and his neck seemed to be covered with golden, pulsating tattoos. Johnny only wanted to die. "Kill me now!" Johnny Rocco pleaded. However, there was no beating Vanterpool, whatever the hell he was. If Johnny had a good arm to snag his .38 snub-nosed gun out of the air, he would aim it down his own mouth and punch himself a one-way ticket to hell. It is time to die. Unfortunately, Mortimer Vanterpool had all the time in the world. Johnny didn't know it, but Mortimer Vanterpool, an extraterrestrial biological entity who had been hired by the Majestic 12 to safeguard the gold box, exactly as Lawrence Bingham had demanded, was immortal. Okay, everybody. There you go. That is Chapter 1 completed. Wow, it feels good to do that. I have no idea if that was good, bad, sucked, or whatever. But, man, I feel like having a nice Miller Lite now. Thank you for listening to that. I guess I should see if I have any chat comments, but I don't even know where to find that stuff. So I'm kind of new at this, so please bear with me a little bit. I'm sure future installments will get better and better. The thing I've always liked about that first chapter is it got me started writing. I had fun with it. I always loved Stephen King growing up and reading his books and his horror. I also like sci-fi a lot, so I think it was very, it just felt right. Like, hey, kind of sci-fi, and I'll go real horror with this opening. Now, the trick of that is it's really, you don't want to set up the book that it's all going to be gore and violence and people getting their heads eaten and stuff like that, and a dog getting killed. I've heard so much about that dog. And even in the future stories, and people say, hey, this is like, alternate worlds, and there's different versions of people eventually if you get into the Call of the Minotaur, and that kind of opens the door that maybe things could have happened differently somewhere else. So I don't really know what it's like in that other universe where that Pomeranian lives. Maybe he's still there. I don't know. Maybe I'll discover that when I finally finish the series, and maybe somehow that dog will find justice. I've heard that quite a bit from a lot of people. But anyway, that aside, it is kind of interesting because I called it Chapter 1, but it really is a prologue. And at the time, it seemed kind of like nobody wanted to have a prologue because people were like, I hate prologues. So it really is a prologue, but I called it Chapter 1. But in any case, in future installments of the Midas Files, I kind of did away with that. I have prologues, and so there were always kind of these incidents that set up the story. They frame the story and the characters that you're going to meet and everything. Vanterpool's a major character in the story. Larry Bingham, we get to meet him briefly, learn a little bit about his world, and he gets murdered, and his family is killed. The whole event, it takes place Swickley, a super nice area in the North Hill suburbs. The whole story kind of takes off in Pittsburgh because that's where I live, and it goes from there. And I think it kind of eventually kind of mirrors my journey as a writer, what I like to do. I like to use local settings and everything. I think Stephen King was a big fan of doing the same thing. All his stories take kind of rooted in Maine, but they, can go all over the place. So it's kind of like my backyard, and I love that. And I also enjoy meeting people that, where I live, and they're like, oh, that's in there and everything. That's cool. I think we all like that. I even like local references I don't get. Like when I read stories, sometimes I'm like, oh wow, like that diner that they mentioned in that book, and so on. It's with such detail. I bet that really is a place that the author went to, and oftentimes that's the case. So eventually, my series gets into areas where, there's no way I'll ever get a chance to experience what that's really like. But that's where you have to be very creative and use your imagination. So with that in mind, that was Chapter 1, The Gold Box of the Midas Protocol, Midas Files Book 1. I hope you enjoyed it. And I'm going to do Chapter 2 next week. And Chapter 2, we get to meet really the main characters, it's a lot more human drama centered at that point. We're getting to learn we get introduced to both the main protagonists. And I like to say it's kind of Caroline Friday is a main protagonist. Hank Raglan is a main protagonist. In some ways, it's basically both their stories and how they intertwine. But there's been times where I think it's, the story, Caroline Friday could be the main person for the whole series. And then at times it's Hank, and it's kind of close sometimes. So if I ever get to the point, and I do want to get to a point where I do an audio book version of this story, I'm very interested in doing a split narration where I have a female voice actor do Caroline Friday, and I do another voice actor way better than me, because I think chapter 1 is starting, unless I practice. It's reading this is not as easy as it thinks. However, I kind of want to, get up close and personal with anyone that enjoys the series. Explain, if you like the book or whatever, then check back for more installments of this. I plan to do these Sunday nights, and I'm sure they'll get better and better. And the whole idea there is just to have fun conversation. I think what we all enjoy about great storytelling, I mean, we love telling everyone I know that I'm friends with, we all love stories, and they all know who they are, and we love to talk about it. A lot of my friends are aspiring writers, like to write too, and so we dig this, we enjoy it, and I think storytelling will never go away, no matter what form it takes. Short reels, whatever, AI, this, that, story, the art of the story is still there. The Midas Files is my humble attempt to kind of do something like that. And I'll just end with one other thought about the inspiration for the whole series, which I was talking to a friend of mine about before. If it's there, you'll see it. But even though I'm greatly inspired by Stephen King, and I love Michael Crichton, and I love the team technical sci-fi stuff too. So I think I kind of blend that a little bit at times, and I genre shift a little bit, where I do get into some horror stuff, and then sometimes I get into techno thriller stuff, and then I think, as you'll discover, and I'm not saying ladies will like this more, but there's a lot of romance stuff that goes on too. It's not just a dude's book, basically. Although I've heard from some people, especially from some ladies that I know, they're like, oh, that's how a dude would describe a relationship. So I don't know. I do my best, but there is a lot of, there's kind of a love triangle that's a big part of the story that comes up too, and so I hope you've heard enough to want to keep going. So I'll see you next week around this time. I'll see if I have any chat questions. I don't know. I'm kind of confused with this whole platform, but I'm still getting used to doing this. So on that note, if you tuned in, thank you. I don't care. I mean, if I'm just talking to my cat, it was kind of a fun thing to do. It's new to me. I enjoyed it. I look forward to doing the next one. I look forward to getting better at this. Just like my books, getting better and better. And I missed the whole thought I was trying to say. Is if you see it, you'll know it was there. My inspiration for the entire series started with the Count of Monte Cristo, Alexander Dumas. Love that book. If you read that, it's a big one. It kind of, as a kid, when I read that, it kind of inspired me to be a writer. I was that in love with the world it created, the intrigue, the romance, the action, the adventure. And in some weird way, I think it's funny because Stephen King, references the Count of Monte Cristo and Shawshank Redemption. He has a main character, his main character Red, where there's a scene where he's like, dumbass, stuff like that. But I just think when I watch Shawshank Redemption, and all the drama, and like that's kind of, there's elements of that are right out of the Count of Monte Cristo, because for those of you who know that story, there's one of the main character, Edmond Dantes, he's imprisoned for a while, and it's really about, it's almost like the Shawshank Redemption, but a long time ago, during the Napoleonic time. So it's a great read. Anyway, that inspired me to kind of write these stories. So I hope you enjoyed. That's it for this episode. Thank you for tuning in. This is Mission Control at the Midas Files, and I'll catch you next week.